And welcome back to We Are Unique. Thanks for joining me today, and it's a great show so far. Really fascinated about this subject, PDA. I think we know we need more awareness of it. And if you have a child or adult who probably needs help or you're not too sure, do email the studio at We Are Unique. That's wau@europeandtv.com. And Libby, you know, it's a fascinating subject. Like I say, I don't know much about it. And I think, you know, by doing these shows, we are raising the awareness of different conditions, different disabilities, and I think it's so important. So thank you for coming all the way down from Derbyshire today in this horrible rainy weather. So can you tell us why PDA isn't diagnosed in many places?
Because it's not in the diagnostic criteria, it's not in the set of manuals. And I think if a clinician is very experienced and very confident, they will diagnose it. You can go to the Elizabeth Newson Centre itself, but what happens, or is starting to happen, is that the people who are doing the diagnosis will say that it's autism with a profile of PDA. And that's, to me, we're getting there. Because the difficulty, if you just say, well, it's autism, is that the strategies that are traditionally employed in schools, for instance, are not going to work for PDA. So a child with autism will want routine, they will want to know exactly what's going to happen. That's not the case with PDA. And with PDA, it's difficult because what might work one day might not necessarily work tomorrow, but if you try it the day afterwards, it might. Yeah. And so it's a very different way of teaching, and they've really got to look at what's important. What do I really need this child to do? And in many ways, when you actually look at it, well, you need them to be safe, you need to keep the other children safe, and you don't want them damaging anything. But apart from that, really, we can prioritise and say, well, we're going to have to let some things go, because it's about picking your battles with a child with PDA. Yeah,
because recently you did a national TV programme, Born Naughty, and there was a little girl, and I was watching that programme with great interest. There's a little girl on there named Holly.
Honey, yep.
Yeah, and can you just tell us what happened with Holly throughout the series?
Well, Honey was, she was 9, must be 11 now, I think, but she was 9, and her parents had been berated. It must be their fault. It must be something they're doing. And at the time, she wasn't actually showing many of these symptoms at school. And that's a pattern that happens. So parents will be saying, you know, God, I'm tearing my hair out. They were screaming, shouting, but they don't see it at school. And unfortunately, many schools are, if they don't see it, it's not happening. So it must be the parenting. It must be the parents. Something they're doing wrong.
So they blame it as bad parenting.
The parent, yes, all the time.
So they send them on is it the triple P?
Yeah, the triple P, which of course is no good for a child with PDA. So her mum had been everywhere trying to get a diagnosis, and so when she'd seen Maverick TV's call for parents, she signed up. But the problem was, she came. It was a children's centre where I saw her in the library. She trashed the library and refused point blank to go into the room. And I managed to get her in there, but I had a bubble wand. And I said if she did X, Y, Z and she could choose the order, we'd go outside and play with the bubble wand. It was tipping it down, and I'd had my hair done especially. But I promised. So I went outside with her with this bubble wand teeming down with the rain. And I think that might have been enough for her to trust me. I did what I said I'd do.
Yeah.
And we thought perhaps we wouldn't be able to use her because she was just very anxious. And well, I'm not doing that, not doing it. So she'd said she loved animals. And so I took her to Sunshine Barn, which a friend of mine, Frances Weston, runs a fantastic place. And she does lots of animal-assisted therapy. And we saw a different girl. So
she completely changed?
Yeah, completely changed. Her voice was different. She'd had a really high-pitched voice like this, and it was a nice low voice, and that just shows you the tension in her neck. The anxiety was there. But it was just an amazing transformation, and she did everything I wanted her to do. She separated from her mother, which she didn't like doing. She played in the playroom, so I was able to interview her mother. Yeah, it was amazing. So on the back of that, I actually got my own therapy dog, and he does wonders with anxious children.
Oh, right. Can you explain a bit about that?
Yeah,
What the dog does?
Well, you can use. I did a course, an animal-assisted therapy course, and you can use them as co-therapists. So they're in the room with you, and it's amazing how it reduces their anxiety. It really is.
Because I always find just stroking a cat, it reduces by just stroking the cat.
It really does.
It lowers the heart rate, lowers the blood pressure, and it's just so calming.
But
so
the
is it the same with
evidence is
dogs?
there. Yes, it is. Yeah, and he's a Labrador, and he's very sensitive to how anxious a young person is. So if he greets them like a very long lost friend, I know that they're really, really anxious, even if I can't always pick up on the signs. And if it's somebody who's tremendously anxious, he's absolutely exhausted at the end. It's like he's taken all that off them. And, you know, I've had children crying to his neck. He just sits there with his head on their lap if he feels they need it. Others, he'll throw them a ball. But it's amazing. So I use him as a co-therapist, but I've also worked with children with selective mutism, and I build him into the programme. So, you know, I said, well, he can't do anything if you don't talk. So sometimes
So you get the children who've got selective mutism to enable to start talking?
Yes. Yeah. We've had some lovely results. So,
amazing.
Yeah, it is.
So are parents watching this now and they think their child or adult may be on the PDA spectrum, how do they go about getting a referral or an assessment? Is it easy or not easy?
No, it isn't easy. You need the support from school because it's pervasive, so it needs to be just more than home, it needs to be at school as well.
So do they have to have a special educational needs coordinator come in to do an assessment first? Yeah,
we need an idea of what they're doing at school, both educationally and socially and emotionally, because obviously that's something that not always looked at. And then the usual route for autism diagnosis, I mean, there's so many different pathways now, aren't there? But it's even worth taking the checklist with you, the characteristics with you. Lots of information on the PDA Society website about that. There's a really good book as well by Jane Sherwin, My Daughter Is Not Naughty. And I've known a lot of parents have actually taken the book with them and said, look, this is my child. There doesn't seem to be a difference between boys and girls. It seems to be fairly even, which is different to other things, isn't it?
That's interesting. So what can we hope for the future for PDA?
Well, I want it. Ideally, it would be actually stated in the DSM-5.
And do you think that will change or not? Or?
I hope so. But if we can just get people to recognise the profile of PDA for now, so they're not just dismissing it out of hand. No, we don't recognise it here. Because that's blinkered, it's old-fashioned, it's outdated, and we just need to be listening to the parents. The parents can tell you everything you need to know.
A lot of children and adults who've got autism can have other comorbid conditions.
Yes.
So does that include PDA as well? So, you know, for example, a child or adult may have ASD, they may have dyspraxia, dyscalculia.
Yes,
so can the PDA fall into that as well?
Well, I think it's part of their profile of ASD. But you're right, we're open to that fact, aren't we, that it can be overlapped with other things.
Yeah.
I mean, they've even just redone the specific language impairment label to include what it's now called developmental language disorder, because before we used to say if they got autism they couldn't have specific language impairment, and yet we were meeting lots of children with language disorders who had autism.
Yeah. And do we know the stats? Do we know what figures or stats worldwide or UK-wide?
There's nothing in writing, but Dr. Judy Eaton, who's done a lot of work with PDA, looked at a study from the Faroe Islands and extrapolated the data to show it's around 30,000 in the UK, which is a lot.
It's a lot. So what are speech and language therapists discussing about PDA? Is there a lot of discussion or lots of webinars or groups? Or
I did a live webinar yesterday on what our role is, but because two of the biggest parts of it are a language processing difficulty, we can actually work out, well, what are their strengths, what do we need to work on, and we can actually work on those things. We can devise programs to address, for instance, their auditory memory might be really poor, so we can put strategies in to help that. Their verbal reasoning will be poor, so they can't predict, they can't put themselves in other people's shoes, they can't problem solve. They won't admit that, but so those things can be addressed as well. And the other aspect, the social communication, they have that veneer, but we need to be able to give them more information about it so that it will help and help them move on.
Is there any good research tools or information where if people are watching the show today they can access today? If people are watching this saying, they think Johnny or Billy may be on the PDA spectrum or have some symptoms of it, is any...
The National Autistic Society has got a good section, but I would signpost them to the PDA Society because there's so much information there.
So if you just Google
PDA Society and they'll find it.
Yeah, and do you have a website as well?
I do, yep. Yeah. It's smalltalk-ltd.co.uk.
Okay, that's brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a big insight for me. I've learned a lot, and I just really appreciate you coming on the show today, so thank you.
My pleasure.
So if you are wondering your child may have PDA or an adult who may have some form of PDA, do email us today at the show. We are unique. It's wau@europeNTV.com. And just after the short break, I'll be joined by actress and TV presenter Dawn Lowe, who's talking about body confidence and bullying. So do join me just after this interval.